Legislative and Audit and Review Commission's November edition. Thank you. I know everybody out there is for good government, and that's why you're here, and that's why we're here. We want to have continuous improvement. That's our goal, and that's my introductory remarks, as Seth Meyers might say. Director, please, Mr. Greer, please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the Commission. I'm Hal Greer, the Staff Director of JLARC. We have 5 items on today's agenda. First, we'll present the findings from the review of the Virginia Department of Health. Then, draft study resolutions for the next round of JLARC studies will be presented to you for your consideration and approval. Next, we'll provide the annual state spending report. We'll then present on George Mason's compliance with its management agreement. And then finally, JLARC staff and the state's chief information officer will provide an update on VITA. Mr. Chairman, before we turn to the agenda, I would like to mention 2 documents that have been prepared for you that we did not plan to take up at today's meeting. It's been the practice for a number of years to each fall provide you with a list of JLARC recommendations made over the last 4 years that are directed to the General Assembly but have not yet been implemented. The purpose has been for you to have this available as you think about legislation for the coming session. You'll find this list of the recommendations. It's in your materials. Looks like that. If any of you have interest in developing legislation to address any of these recommendations, we'd be happy to work with you in legislative services in drafting it. Also in your materials is our annual aggregate report on economic development incentives. It provides an overview of state spending on these incentives as well as the effectiveness of these incentives and their economic impact. Looks like this. We're happy to answer any questions that any of you have about any aspects of this report. Mr. Chairman, now to today's agenda. You're going to hear this morning about an agency, the Virginia Department of Health, that has been struggling to perform its basic administrative functions for years now. The pandemic, as well as a combination of other factors, have contributed to the current situation. As you may be aware, these fundamental challenges have led to the need for legislative intervention in several instances. The administration and current leadership of the department have recognized the problems, they've been transparent about them, and they've begun to take significant steps to address them. However, serious problems and challenges remain, and they'll not be solved overnight, but likely take years. This report has 31 recommendations which are intended to help address the challenges and problems that the Department of Health faces. Most are directed to the agency. A few are directed to other agencies in Virginia state government and recommend that the administration leverage the expertise of those agencies to assist the Department of Health. And finally, there are a few recommendations directed to the General Assembly to provide needed assistance. The report also has recommendations for the General Assembly to have a more active oversight role in monitoring the progress of the department in addressing these current challenges. Finally, I would like to share, Mr. Chairman, that the department's substantial financial management challenges and the history of how they got to this point highlight the need for the state as a whole to place a higher priority on ensuring that agencies have proper internal financial controls and accountability measures. I'd like to thank Dr. Shelton and her staff, who've been extremely open and cooperative as we've conducted this review. Tracy Smith oversaw the review, and Drew Dickinson was the project leader. Drew?
Welcome, Drew. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and how many years you've been at JLARC and this project?
Sure. Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. I'm Drew Dickinson, Chief Legislative Analyst at JLARC. Been with the agency, I guess, what is it now?
That's okay.
13 years, something like that, but I'll leave it at that.
Terrific. Well, welcome.
Well, thank you for your attention and time this morning. As Hal mentioned, my name is Drew Dickinson. I was a project leader for a review of the Virginia Department of Health. Get the slides, come on, there you go. Resolution for the study directed us to review various aspects of the Virginia Department of Health, including how well it manages its state and federal funds, its staffing, and its organizational structure. The resolution also directed us to review VDH's programs for improving the state's nursing pipeline. And we have information specifically on these programs in Appendix E. Slide 3 summarizes our team's primary research activities, which included over 100 interviews, 2 surveys, data analyses, and reviews of existing reports and other relevant documents. You can find more information about our methods in Appendix B of the report. We found that several major overlapping developments have created substantial operational challenges for VDH. VDH's numerous financial management problems have affected other organizations and required state intervention. And that VDH lacks sufficient qualified and well-trained staff, reliable and efficient systems, and effective internal controls to manage its finances. We also found that VDH has experienced considerable staffing challenges in recent years, and its protracted and inefficient hiring process prolongs vacancies in critical positions. VDH is overly reliant on contractors, which prevents it from developing a stable and knowledgeable workforce. And VDH staff are not consistently held accountable for their performance, increasing employee discontent and perpetuating a negative workplace culture. In the interest of time, I'll not cover all of our findings and recommendations, but if you have any questions about anything in the report, I'd be happy to answer them.
Well, thanks for the cheery start here.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. In this first section, I'd like to give you some high-level background on the Virginia Department of Health. VDH provides a wide variety of public health programs and services. For example, it's responsible for detecting and mitigating communicable diseases, administering health and nutrition programs, and inspecting restaurants and drinking water sources across the state. The Commissioner also has powers related to public health emergencies, including the authority to order quarantines or treatments to protect public health. VDH's central office is responsible for supporting a complex statewide public health system. The agency delivers most of its public health services through its 32 health districts and 114 health departments. VDH has about 3,100 classified staff, and about 2/3 of these staff work within a health district or department. Similar to other states' public health agencies, VDH's budget is heavily reliant on federal funds. As shown on slide 9, the agency received an influx of federal funds following the COVID-19 pandemic. Before I turn to some of the key issues that we identified, it's important to note that VDH faced several challenges during the period preceding our study, which we considered when evaluating its operations and management. These challenges include the COVID-19 pandemic, a poorly timed and ultimately unsuccessful reorganization of critical administrative functions, and recurrent turnover in key agency leadership and management positions. VDH was experiencing these challenges while receiving and having to manage the significant influx of federal funds shown on slide 9. If you're interested, Chapter 2 provides more detail on each of these factors. It's also important to mention that VDH's current leaders and the administration have been transparent about the various problems that VDH is facing and have taken steps to begin to address them. These include increasing oversight of central office operations and budgets, creating new chief operating officer, chief financial officer, and controller positions, and adding financial management staff to program offices. Much remains to be done, though, and the recommendations in our report reflect improvements that are still needed to address the VDH's various financial management, staffing, and accountability issues. Mr. Chairman, I'll pause there in case there are any questions.
Any questions from the members? Yes, Delegate Wilt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you listed in slide 11 the new positions that have been taken on. Can you give us a timeline when those positions were created, and how does that fall within the timeline of your report?
Delegate Wilt, thanks for the question. So the Chief Operating Officer position was created in November 2022, and then Chief Financial Officer position and Controller positions were appointed earlier, or were created, are being hired right now. within this current administration.
You follow up, Delegate Wilton? Okay. Anybody else? Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll now turn to some of our findings related to financial management at VDH. VDH is a large, financially complex agency with numerous funding streams and a high volume of financial transactions. In fiscal year 2024, VDH was responsible for managing about $1.3 billion in funding, including funding from 165 federal grants. 2 offices lead VDH's financial management activities, but many other staff and contract staff throughout the agency are involved. We found that in recent years, VDH has experienced numerous financial challenges, including fraudulent activity, overspending, late payments to vendors, its own staff, and other state agencies, poor management of federal grants, and late and inaccurate financial reporting.
Mr. Dickinson, let me ask you a question. On these federal grants, are these routine federal grants, many of them where they get the same grant every year? Or are these new, is this a new subject every year?
It's a little bit of both, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
So are we any better on the ones that we get every year? I mean, the ones that are routine, do we perform better on those than we do with the new ones?
Mr. Chairman, what I do know is that issues, particularly with EPA grants, which I'll cover here, are recurring issues that have been happening.
Even though we get this grant every year?
Even though the grant is
Okay,
continuous.
thank you.
All right, slides. Chapter 3 of the report describes the various financial management challenges that VDH has been experiencing. Some of these problems have received considerable public attention, including the recent overspending and fraudulent activity within the VDH's Office of Emergency Medical Services, and overspending within the VDH Office of Drinking Water that required appropriations from the General Assembly to avoid staff layoffs. External entities, including the Auditor of Public Accounts, Department of General Services, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, have also found substantial deficiencies with VDH's financial management. In recent years, VDH has struggled to pay its bills on time and accurately. In fiscal year 2024, VDH paid 29% of its approximately 30,000 vendor invoices late. VDH's late payments have affected other state agencies' ability to pay their own bills. For example, late payments from VDH caused VITA staff to have to secure a line of credit from the Department of Accounts just to ensure that the agency could meet its own financial obligations. As the report notes, VDH has also made duplicative payments to vendors, state agency, and its own staff. And slide 17 shows how the issue of late payments at VDH has worsened over the past several years. VDH has also experienced significant challenges managing its federal grant funding, and problems have included incorrect drawdowns of grant funding, inadequate documentation of expenses, and incorrect and late federal reporting. Before August 2024, VDH was not even aware of all the grants it was responsible for managing. The federal government has noticed VDH's financial management problems, and some grantors have modified their practices for issuing funds to VDH to reduce the risk of mismanaged federal funds. In 2022, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency decided to no longer provide grant funding to VDH in advance due to concerns about VDH's ability to manage federal funds. Instead, VDH must request reimbursement for grant expenses. The EPA's decision to put VDH on reimbursement basis is significant and has created cash flow pressures within the agency. It's also a relatively uncommon step, according to EPA staff.
Mr. Dickinson, how many states are in that where they have to seek reimbursement versus receive the grant up front?
Mr. Chairman, in our EPA region, we're the only one on reimbursement basis. And
So
EPA,
we're in the Philadelphia region for EPA, and they have four or five states.
think that's correct.
Yeah,
That's correct, yes, sir.
okay. So it maybe not that bad. I mean, we're just the worst in region, whatever it is, region 3 of EPA, whatever the region is. Thank you.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, we did talk with EPA staff, and they said it's just relatively uncommon for states to have to be put on reimbursement
Okay,
basis.
all right, good. Thanks.
So, according to VDH staff, other federal grantors have or are considering modifying their grants payment processes due to financial management concerns. The General Assembly has been briefed on some of VDH's financial management challenges and has provided critical financial support to the agency in recent years. Some of these actions are listed on this slide. The executive branch has also dedicated significant time and resources to addressing VDH's financial management challenges, including asking DPB staff to evaluate VDH's grants management earlier this year. DPB made 28 recommendations to VDH after their review. Their recommendations appear reasonable, are likely to lead to improvements in VDH's financial management, and are consistent with some of the recommendations made in our report. We recommend the General Assembly direct VDH to report on its progress in implementing DPB's grant management recommendations to the Joint Subcommittee on Health and Human Resources Oversight by September of next year. Mr. Chairman, we also found that staffing challenges, insufficient training, poor internal controls, and inadequate financial management IT systems have contributed to VDH's inability to manage its finances. For this presentation, I'll focus on problems related to staffing, training, and internal controls, but we have more information in Chapter 3 about issues with VDH's financial management IT systems, if you're interested. Over the past several years, VDH has experienced high turnover among both financial management, leadership, and staff. Turnover within VDH's Office of Financial Management has been especially severe. In fact, that office lost 43% of its classified staff between June 2023 and June 2024. As a result of the turnover and vacancies, VDH has relied heavily on temporary contract staff to carry out day-to-day financial management activities of the agency. As of June 2024, contractors made up 63% of OFM staff. During interviews and in survey responses, many staff reported concerns about the performance and training of contract staff with financial management responsibilities. In our survey, many VDH staff also reported concerns about their own level of training on their financial management responsibilities. For example, 405 VDH staff reported having procurement responsibilities, and 34% of these staff who worked in central office reported not being sufficiently trained or otherwise qualified to carry out these responsibilities. A lack of sufficient training of staff with financial management responsibilities places the agency at risk of errors, confusion, and delays, and has contributed in part to VDH's financial management challenges. Stabilizing and improving staffing of financial management positions at VDH will be critical for the agency to make meaningful, sustained improvements to the agency's financial management capabilities. To fully address these staffing issues, VDH will need the temporary assistance of other state agencies. We have recommendations in the report to leverage the expertise at the Department of Human Resources Management and at the Department of Accounts to help VDH fill key vacant financial management positions with qualified staff. We also have a recommendation in Chapter 3 to ensure that VDH staff who are responsible for financial management tasks are trained or otherwise qualified to perform them. And this recommendation is summarized on slide 26. VDH's various financial management problems are also partly a result of poor internal controls at the agency. Generally speaking, internal controls are processes, policies, and procedures that help ensure the reliability of financial transactions and reporting, reduce errors, and prevent fraud. In recent years, VDH and external entities have reported problems with the agency's internal controls. To ensure that there's sustained attention to the adequacy of the agency's internal controls, we have a recommendation for the General Assembly to codify the expectation that VDH maintains staff responsible for ensuring proper and effective internal controls. We also recommend the DOA conduct an independent review of VDH's internal controls, as well as a second follow-up review to ensure that any identified deficiencies are corrected. Mr. Chairman, before I leave this section, I want to mention that it is encouraging to hear that leadership of other state agencies, including the Department of Human Resources Management and the Department of Accounts, have committed to helping VDH in the near term address its staffing and internal control issues. Without the help of other agencies, it will be very difficult for VDH to fully correct these issues. And I'll pause here in case there are any questions.
Okay, we have questions here. Delegate Wilt, and then Senator Pike.
Thank you, Mr. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These outside contractors, how long have they been a part of the process? And I mean, what you're reporting on is the less than satisfactory financial management of the department. How much of that was this outside or these outside contractors responsible for, and any recourse there?
Delegate Wilt certainly are a factor, and we have some details in terms of the length, and I'll actually cover some of that a little bit later, but some of these contractors have been at the agency for quite a while. Over 30% have been there for at least 3 years, and then there's 10% that have been there for at least 10 years. And so we definitely heard a lot of concerns about their training, and contractors themselves reported, I haven't received the training to understand how to do this work. And so certainly part of it, but I think they're one aspect of it, but there are some other issues, important issues that need to be addressed.
Delegate Willie, you got a follow-up? Do you have a follow-up? Okay, Senator Pike, and then Delegate Tatum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the work, and I want to say I appreciate a lot of the frontline health department workers that work in our communities every day. On page 18, you cite that the VDH did not have a complete inventory of all the agency's grants. What is I guess, if there's not visibility, there's not visibility also on the delivery of service. Funding provides service. In your review, did you find which programs were impacted by the lack of funding or cut off? And I've heard from constituents that maternal health programs have been cut and don't exist in some locations, depending on part of the Commonwealth, and many other important services due to this. Can you speak to that?
Sure. Senator Pike, thank you for the question. The issues that we're seeing in terms of financial management have broad impacts across the agency, and we interviewed staff within the Office of Family Health Services, and they certainly expressed serious concerns about some of the impacts that they're having, that these financial management issues are having on programs that they oversee, and so that could be one of the programs that they're referring to. And we do have a recommendation later on, which I'll cover, just to make sure that leadership has better awareness of how well the programs are actually performing. And so that could get, if you have that information, you could see maybe it's not doing as well as we expected. What's causing that? It could be some issues with financial management or other issues. So it's a good question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, this is a very sobering report, and I guess the good news is that all these issues are being addressed, so I appreciate all the work you've gone into this, but it appears that this is a long-standing, years of overspending, and this has been kind of a culture of problem. I guess my first question is, why has this not come to light in the past? And it seems like it's going to take some time to rectify all this, so is there a timeline to make this all better? Because this doesn't seem like this just happened overnight. This has been long-standing.
Thank you for the question. Yes, you're exactly right. These problems have developed over multiple years, and it's going to take multiple years to address them. And so we have some insights in Chapter 2 in terms that can kind of kind of show the various factors that contributed to this. And I think the COVID pandemic was a major impact in terms of attention at the agency. But yes, there's just been not insufficient attention by leaders and staff at the agency over several years across administrations to making sure that these key things are done well.
Okay, the delegate hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I share the sentiment that this is it's shocking and disturbing, this report. I want to focus a little bit on the contractors aspect and their statement that they haven't, gotten the proper training. Did you all investigate, or were any of these contractors competitively bidded?
That's a good question. Delegate hearing, we don't know, but that's a good question you could ask.
Yeah, that would be something I think is important for us to know eventually. Other look at management. I mean, usually you supervise contractors and you make sure that they're trained. And so my question is, in your investigation, was there any evidence that these contractors, and I would imagine they probably are like, I don't know how to do this, I'm assuming, and sort of like what was the management's response when they found out that the contractors felt like they weren't trained properly?
So the current leadership, after seeing our study, they are aware of the issue of high reliance on contractors and have said that they're committed to the recommendation and addressing that. And we have 2 recommendations, which I'll mention here, that can help make sure that where appropriate, they're used, but where you don't need them and where you need full-time staff, they're not used. And so they have acknowledged the issues and have indicated that they're committed to taking steps to address that issue.
Delegate hearing, you follow up?
I don't. Thank you.
Yeah, Jason.
Contractors themselves have historically not been well supervised. Supervisors themselves are, telling us, yeah, we're not supervising them well. The contractors are telling us, yeah, we're not really supervised. And so I think to answer your question, what did the supervisors say when they were, made aware that the contractors weren't really sure what they were supposed to be doing? I'm not sure that awareness was always there.
Okay. Mr. Chair, if I may, I would like to know whether these contracts were competitively bidded or were they so sourced. I'm very interested. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else here on this one? Our economy in Northern Virginia is, we have a lot of government contractors there. Maybe it's the biggest industry. So we know that contractors aren't necessarily bad because they're contractors. So it's the system they're working in so just because your report says that half of them are contractors doesn't mean necessarily by itself that that's the problem, although we would love to know what the right balance would be, right? And how competitive are you in, is the health department in recruiting folks? I mean, we know in the health space that there's shortages in every field. I mean, from nurses and specialists and anyone in the behavioral health field, there's a shortage of. So I have a little bit of sympathy to that. And the contractors do give you flexibility. That's the argument for contracting out, right? You have flexibility. So in this report somewhere, do you talk about the correct balance? Because we're not going to go all of a sudden from 60% contracting to all government employees. We're not going to do that, right?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, we're careful to not say that you should never use contractors. I think it's not a reality in terms of some of these positions. You just maybe not be able to find the positions to fill. But our recommendations are just to make sure that we're starting to pay attention to their use of it and making sure that when they do use them, it's when they need to use them. And so that's kind of our key thing, and not making a judgment in terms of what specifically it should be. But what I will say that the data that's available to us indicates that VDH relies much more heavily on contractors than other state agencies and also other state public health departments in nearby states. And so that is indicative that there are some opportunities to maybe reduce the reliance.
So what are the impediments to hiring? That was part of my question. What are the impediments to hiring our own people?
Mr. Chairman, it's a great question, and I'll get to that in just
Okay.
a little bit, the hiring
Thank
process.
you. Let's keep going, and thank you so much.
It's a good segue into this next one. So I'll now turn to our findings related to VDH staffing and its hiring process. We found that VDH has experienced considerable staffing challenges in recent years, especially in offices responsible for carrying out critical administrative functions. In fiscal year 2024, VDH experienced a turnover rate of 16%, which is higher than the turnover rate among state employees more broadly, which was 10%. Turnover rates among VDH administrative offices have been especially high in recent years. Vacancy rates have also been high within some offices, especially administrative offices. As of June 2024, 40% of classified positions within the Office of Financial Management and 30% of positions within the Office of Procurement and General Services were vacant. Several other offices, including the Office of Health Equity, which administers VDH's loan forgiveness and scholarship programs, and the Office of Licensure and Certification have had high vacancy rates this past June. In our survey, almost half of central office staff reported that their offices typically did not have enough staff to handle the workload. And more than 2/3 of staff in 4 offices reported insufficient staffing. Insufficient staffing levels have impacted VDH's ability to fulfill some of its key public health responsibilities. For example, the report notes that due to insufficient staffing, VDH's Office of Licensure and Certification has been unable to perform key state-mandated inspections of inpatient hospitals, outpatient surgical hospitals, and nursing homes. The report also describes how some VDH health districts are experiencing substantial staffing challenges. The Portsmouth and Hampton health districts had among the highest turnover and vacancy rates in fiscal year 2024. And several positions that are key to VDH's core mission, including WIC program staff and public health nurses, have especially high vacancy rates. We sought to understand the reasons for the relatively high turnover among VDH staff and found that among surveyed staff who were dissatisfied with their jobs or with VDH as an employer, the primary reasons for the dissatisfaction were inadequate compensation, dissatisfaction with agency management, and a lack of accountability. VDH leadership appears aware of the issues with compensation, and we suggest they conduct a targeted review to understand the competitiveness of certain positions. We have recommendations in Chapter 6, some of which I'll mention later, that would help address concerns with agency leadership, accountability, and culture. Mr. Chairman, given the VDH's high vacancy rates, especially in certain offices and health districts, it's important that the agency have an effective and efficient hiring process. We found that VDH's protracted and inefficient hiring process prolongs vacancies in critical positions. In fiscal year 2024, it took VDH an average of 101 days to fill vacant positions. And this was 26 days longer than the average across state agencies. These delays are having a real impact on the agency's ability to fill positions. According to hiring managers at the agency, at least 490 qualified candidates took another job or withdrew their application within the past 12 months because of delays in VDH's hiring process. VDH now has dedicated staff to assist certain offices with hiring, but most of these staff are contractors funded with a temporary grant. The report notes that other large state agencies, such as VDOT, have similar recruiter positions, but that they are full-time classified positions. And so we have a recommendation for the General Assembly to fund at least 4 full-time classified recruiter positions at VDH.
And Mr. Dickinson, this would be to recruit people at all the offices across the Commonwealth?
Mr. Chairman, this would be broadly for the agency, but we specifically recommend that they be focused on those offices that are struggling and those critical and hard to fill positions. And
So there are some offices that are doing better than others at filling their positions, and this recommendation is to help those that are struggling the most. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, that would be correct.
Okay, thank you.
Now, having full-time permanent staff to assist with recruitment should help with the delays. But we also found that confusion about the hiring process and poorly written job descriptions for advertised positions are also contributing to hiring delays at VDH. We have several recommendations for VDH to address these issues, and these recommendations are summarized on slide 41. And Mr. Chairman, one other finding I'd highlight related to staffing is something that we just talked about, in that VDH is overly reliant on contractors, which is preventing it from building a stable and knowledgeable workforce. The report notes that VDH's use of contractors has increased substantially during the pandemic and remains high. Although a majority of contractors were COVID-related contractors early in the pandemic, by June 2024, less than a third were classified by VDH as COVID contractors. Agency-wide, contractors make up about 36% of VDH's current workforce. This heavy reliance on contractors is inherently destabilizing, as contract staff are less likely to stay at the agency for an extended period, and when they leave, they take with them any institutional knowledge they developed and training that they received.
Mr. Dickinson, Senator Deeds has a
A
question.
couple of slides back, Mr. Dixon, it looked to me like while the increase in the use of contractors went up during the pandemic, it stayed high. And I wonder if there's a reason for that.
Senator Deeds is a good question, and that's one of we would expect it to decrease at a similar rate if they were just kind of relying on them for the COVID pandemic, but it has stayed high, and we think that needs some attention.
Senator Deeds? Okay. Anybody else while we're stopped? Yeah, it's Delegate Wilt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, forgive me. So on slide 38, one of the numbers you cited, at least 490 qualified candidates took another job because of the process. So I guess I'm a little confused. Why would you recommend hiring recruiters to go find these people if they're showing up, if the breakdown is internal, and if we can clean that up, why would we have to hire recruiters?
Delegate Wilt, yes, we think that the recruiters can help, but there are some other fundamental deficiencies with that hiring process at VDH that if they're not addressed, it may not make much of a difference because like confusion, for example, about the hiring process. Just lay out what it is. What is the hiring process? Who's responsible for doing what? That can simplify things, and we heard from staff that has caused some of these delays. And so there are some fundamental things to just make sure that the hiring process itself is efficient as it can be, and to decrease the likelihood that so many qualified candidates are no longer.
So that is the main purpose of your recommendation for the 4 recruiters, is to make sure this doesn't happen? What Delegate Wilt is asking about? Is that the primary reason?
Mr. Chairman, it is to help the efficiency and reduce the confusion in the hiring process, but there are other recommendations that we have that are not just add more staff.
Okay.
And also to address some deficiency in the process.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
if I might, Delegate Wilt, that I think the vision for these positions is not solely just recruitment, going out there and finding folks. It's also being responsible for the entire process of getting them hired. And I think that 490, that is a significant number. I would say many of those positions may not necessarily have been in offices that are experiencing the greatest challenges. So that would have been agency-wide, I think. And so these new positions would focus primarily on very high-need, key critical positions in the offices that are having the greatest challenges. But I do think that's a very insightful question. And we did, I think, go back and forth a little bit on, to what extent is this needed? Could there be some other fixes here? But ultimately, given that other state agencies do this, and we talked to them, like VDOT, and they've experienced a lot of success with it, we did think it was worth trying at VDH.
Okay, Delegate Tatum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when you were looking into all this, did you find that they were trying to hire people and that just it was the workforce issue, which everyone is dealing with, or they just stopped looking because they kept relying on the contractors?
So, Delegate, they are still actively posting jobs. It's just these jobs it's just taking a long time to fill. And so they are recruiting for these positions, but just the process itself is just taking too long and is causing these issues. So there are some issues that we talk about in the report where, for example, the job advertisements were so general that didn't actually communicate the need. And so we heard that at least one office just stopped recruiting because of they weren't getting the applications that they needed. So we have recommendations to address that.
Follow up? Okay. Please continue. Thanks.
Let's see. All right, Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned, in some cases, the use of contractors does appear reasonable, and VDH has some time-limited grants that you may not want or need to fill full-time classified positions. But there are other times instances where use of contractors doesn't appear to be strategic or cost-effective. And we also note that the high reliance on long-term contractors may put VDH at risk of employee misclassification and civil penalties. So we provide 2 recommendations in Chapter 5 to help VDH better manage its use of contractors. And these recommendations are listed on slide 46. Mr. Chairman, I'll pause there again in case there are any questions.
Just personally, I've known people in the federal government that have been as a contractor for the Federal Aviation Administration, for instance, their whole career. So it would way beyond 10 years. So sometimes, I like the fact that you're saying where they should be used and where they shouldn't be used, because there are some federal agencies that use them permanently. The Defense Department, is a big source of jobs in the Commonwealth. Thank you. Please continue.
All right. Slide. All right, in my last section, I'll cover some of our findings related to management and accountability at VDH. VDH is experiencing some significant management challenges. As some context, only 1 in 3 VDH staff who responded to our survey agreed with the statement, VDH is a well-managed organization. We sought to understand the specific concerns that staff had about how the agency was managed. We found that VDH staff are not consistently held accountable for their performance, and that this is contributing to employee discontent and perpetuating a negative workplace culture. Throughout the study, VDH staff at all levels reported concerns about the agency's lack of accountability. This lack of accountability is causing significant operational and staffing issues for the agency. In our survey, about 20% of VDH staff reported that their coworkers are not held accountable for their performance. And more than 1/3 of supervisors reported that VDH's processes for evaluating staff performance and addressing underperformance are not working well. The lack of accountability is contributing to low morale and employee turnover. This slide illustrates some of the concerns that we heard in interviews and in survey responses related to a lack of accountability at the agency. State law and DHRM policy establish specific employee performance management requirements. These requirements can be challenging and time-consuming, but must be followed to effectively hold employees accountable. Certain issues at VDH make accountability more difficult, including a lack of clear performance expectations for some staff, a lack of understanding among supervisors of the state performance management process, and requirements, and an excessive number of direct reports under some supervisors. Chapter 6 has more details on all of these issues, as well as targeted recommendations for VDH to help address them. And our recommendations are summarized on slide 53. We also found that current VDH leadership has taken steps to better monitor central office operations and performance, but still lacks sufficient visibility into the operations and performance of the agency's 32 health districts. The report notes how a lack of awareness about the operations and performance of the agency's offices and districts has allowed problems to grow. The recent financial mismanagement at the Office of Emergency Medical Services, for example, could have been prevented with basic attention to how well the office managed its funds. Current leaders have taken steps to improve the oversight of central office, but the visibility into health districts' performance remains limited and insufficient. This lack of visibility will continue to make it very difficult for agency leaders to proactively identify and address problems at the agency. To improve the ability of current and future state health commissioners to understand the agency's performance, VDH should develop an internal agency-wide dashboard, as some other large state agencies have done. Access to up-to-date and critical information would allow leadership to focus its efforts on the offices and health districts that need the most attention and support, and to hold staff and leadership within these offices and health districts accountable for their performance. And slide 57 summarizes our recommendation related to developing an internal agency management dashboard. In Chapter 6, we also note that VDH leadership has increased internal audit staff over the past year, but that OSIG-required investigations have strained available staffing resources. VDH has successfully increased staffing of its Office of Internal Audit from 4 staff in June 2023 to 9 staff in June 2024. However, rather than focusing on internal agency risks, VDH's internal auditors have had to devote most of their time to completing an increasing number of specific fraud, waste, and abuse investigations that have been delegated to them by OSIG. This has left internal audit staff with no capacity to conduct audits of other aspects of the agency that could use scrutiny, and has contributed to VDH completing less than half of the required IT security audits of the agency's 59 sensitive systems in recent years. OSIG determines whether to assign waste, fraud, and abuse hotline investigations to itself or to other agencies. And we recommend the Office of the Governor direct OSIG to assign all hotline investigations relating to VDH to its own staff rather than VDH's Office of Internal Audit. This would free up considerable staff resources within VDH's internal audit to provide better oversight of the agency. We also recommend the General Assembly provide general funds to support at least 2 additional IT auditor positions within the VDH Office of Internal Audit. VDH reports that this would enable them to meet state IT audit requirements.
So just to summarize that, you want more investigations or allegations to go to the VDH's own staff, but you want more staffing for the internal auditor anyway, even though that you're suggesting that fewer complaints go to them. That seems a little contradictory. I guess this is such a mess that both can be true. I guess you need both, but.
Mr. Chairman, so yes, we recommend that the OSIG hotline, specific hotline investigations, like OSIG does them, which would free up internal audit resources. But then there's also IT auditor staff that would be needed that would have different credentials necessarily to do this work.
Thank you.
In Chapter 6, we also point out 2 changes to the Code of Virginia that would help ensure VDH continues to have leaders who are capable of effectively managing such a large and complex organization. One of them is to codify the agency's chief operating officer position, which was first created by the governor in 2022. This position bolstered the agency's ability to identify and begin to resolve its operational and financial problems. However, it's not required by statute, and whether future administrations will continue the position is unclear. The second change is to specify in state law that VDH commissioners must have organizational leadership and administration experience. In the report, we give examples of other states that have articulated this type of requirement in statute for their leaders of their public health departments. And slide 61 summarizes these two recommendations. Lastly, Mr. Chairman, given the magnitude and severity of the problems that we identified, we believe they warrant increased attention by the legislature, at least temporarily. Current VDH's leaders' willingness to accept ownership of the challenges facing the agency is both encouraging and positive. But fully addressing the numerous and substantial financial management, human resources, and accountability challenges of VDH will take multiple years and require sustained attention across administrations. To ensure that the recent improvements are sustained and that progress continues, we recommend the General Assembly require the VDH Commissioner to provide semi-annual written and in-person reports on the agency's progress in implementing the report's recommendations to the Joint Subcommittee of Health and Human Resources Oversight through at least December 2026. And that concludes my prepared remarks, Mr. Chairman, but I'd be happy to take any other questions members may have.
Okay, who has questions before we hear from Dr. Sheldon? Okay, thank you very much for all your hard work. Yes, Delegate Simon.
Yeah, one quick question on this waste, fraud, and abuse question. Does the money always get found, or do we end up, has the Commonwealth's attorney or Attorney General's office had to get involved at all, or has the money eventually been found and it's just a matter of not knowing where it is?
Is that quite, are you referring to the Office of Emergency Medical Services, that issue?
Yeah, the issue that, well, you all had the recommendation that there was an excessive number of waste, fraud, and abuse investigations and some, questions about how we would reassign those. I guess my question is, what's the result of all those investigations of waste, fraud? Well, one of those elements is fraud. And so has that been a problem, or is it just more of a not knowing where the funds are? Or do you know?
Delegate Simon, I think that, we reviewed, our team reviewed the types of investigations that were, being reported and that OSIG essentially was sending back over to VDH. I'd have to look over the team, but I don't think that there were any allegations of actual fraud within the questions that OSIG was looking into. So I can't answer your specific question in terms of if there were, how that would be handled. It essentially, I believe, would be a criminal investigation, just as occurred with OEMS. But what we're saying here is that in looking at what OSIG is receiving and sending back over to VDH, these are important, though relatively minor allegations, like someone, for example, is not reporting their time correctly. And so it doesn't seem to make sense to us for VDH, given their resource constraints and all of the numerous known problems and potentially unknown problems that they have, to be using their own internal audit staff to investigate things like that when OSIG is perfectly capable of doing that. But to more directly answer your question, I think in terms of fraud, we did not see within those OSIG, the allegations that OSIG was sending back over to VDH, specific allegations of fraud.
Ms. Smith, can you remind us how the famous fraud case was adjudicated, how that went, what charges were brought, who brought the charges, that type of thing? Whether the gentleman pled guilty.
Yes, that's correct. Drew, you want to?
But how was that discovered? Oh. Who adjudicated it, that type of thing?
So I believe that it was discovered, and Drew, VDH, correct me if I'm wrong, essentially by kind of a review that VDH conducted on its own of that office's budget. They identified a shortfall of funding that was supposed to be there. It wasn't there, and so they started asking questions as to how that happened. And essentially, the individual who perpetuated that fraud was charged.
So you referred the case to the local Commonwealth attorney? Okay, thank you. Douglas Simon, do you have a follow-up? Okay, thank you. Anybody else here before we hear from Dr. Shelton? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? But how long you've been at the agency and that type of thing?
Yes, sir.
Just a little personal. We'd like to get to know our agency directors.
Well, thank you, Chairman Sickles. I was appointed to this agency in May of 2023, so just about a year and a half ago that I've been in this role. I am an OBGYN by background and worked as a local public health director in the Southwest for 5 years. I was also a chief medical officer with the Ballot Health System for 2 years prior to being appointed into this role.
Oh, terrific. Thank you so much. Well, we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Well, we'll dive right in. Chairman Sickles and members of commission.
Can somebody answer their phone? Okay. It was a ghost. Okay.
Well, Chairman Sickles and members of the commission, I want to thank Mr. Greer, Ms. Smith, and Mr. Dickinson and the entire JLARC team that was on site for nearly a year to study the financial management, staffing, and accountability systems of the Virginia Department of Health. Their surveys have been collaborative and professional, and there's no doubt that the recommendations outlined in this report will lead to better public health across Virginia. I and the VDH leadership team agree with the recommendations and will continue our work to address them. I believe it is important to note that this study reinforces the significant challenges VDH has had over many years. I'd like to start by highlighting 3 broad themes. The challenges raised in this report were created over multiple years and will take multiple years to fully correct. While my team and I did not create these challenges, we have been and continue to be committed to solving them, placing the appropriate financial and operational controls, and hiring the right leaders to drive change in the agency. We are committed to the transparency and ethical use of taxpayer dollars. We are rebuilding a culture of accountability. The workforce issues, and specifically the healthcare workforce issues that the entire country is facing, are a major factor in whether the solutions that both we and JLARC have identified will be successful, or if we need to leverage other solutions to successfully address these challenges. As was pointed out in the report, the COVID experience had devastating impacts on our agency. In a time when our workforce was stressed to historical levels with public health impact, the rapid expansion in role and responsibilities and demands of the work of the pandemic, there was an infusion of billions of dollars and thousands of contractors without the proper emphasis on the administrative functions over that same time period. And by coincidence, the failed rollout of an agency-wide consolidation of financial and human resources responsibilities during that same time period left overwhelming negative impacts that we are still dealing with today. Since I began my role as commissioner in May of 2023, the new leadership team at VDH has taken significant actions to address these issues. In his role as a newly appointed Chief Operating Officer, Christopher Lindsay, who joined VDH in November of 2022, has led monthly operating reviews of all of our programs over the last 14 months. This accountability measure, involving members of the senior leadership team and administrative leads, ensures that senior leadership at the agency level and program levels and the leaders of the office level regularly review together areas of finance and budget, key human resources issues, employee engagement plans, and specific metrics-based goals and objectives for their offices. Consolidated operational leadership at the same senior level has led to greater accountability, improved operational efficiencies, and enhanced communication across the agency. We have worked to rebuild our administrative leadership, moving our Deputy Commissioner for Administration role to a true Chief Financial Officer role, making it clear that financial accountability is of utmost importance across our organization. We have created an Office of Grants Management, a completely new office that will manage our grants process from beginning to end, ensuring that accountability and compliance controls are front and center as we administer the over $2 billion of open federal grants. Thanks to funding of this in the last budget placed by Governor Youngkin and agreed to by legislature, this office is live and filling roles and responsibilities. We have created the controller position, a new role which previously did not exist, to oversee financial compliance and accounting processes, and are working to streamline other leadership opportunities and draw and up and down through our financial function. We have placed significant emphasis on filling other leadership and staff vacancies both in our offices of financial management and offices of human resources. At one point, we had a nearly 60% vacancy across our financial operations, and thanks to placement of dedicated recruiters covered by a federal workforce grant, we have begun to fill those positions. Our human resource vacancy rate was once over 50% and is now over 90% filled. Recruitment and retention of finance and human resources personnel is front and center at our agency, and we know that public health cannot function without the administrative support that it requires. We have also evaluated the span of control of leaders throughout the organization at the senior leader, manager, and supervisor levels, and have already instituted key changes in our community health services leadership, creating regional health directors roles that ensure communication and accountability to improve across the 35 health districts. We have recruited and filled 2 other key vacant senior leadership positions: the Deputy Commissioner for Community Health Services, which is responsible for the entirety of our health district operations, as well as the Deputy Commissioner for Population Health and Preparedness, the deputy overseeing nearly all of our public health programs. The placement of these 2 leaders has already led to advancements in accountability. We have placed significant emphasis on rebuilding our internal audit team, an office that last summer was a 50% vacancy rate and at the end of the past summer was 100% filled. Even so, the resources of this office were significantly strained due to the impacts of the Office of Emergency Medical Services investigation that has occurred over the last year. Rebuilding accountability in the Office of Emergency Medical Services has been front and center in our leadership team as we work to correct years of leadership neglect and such a key public health component. Rebuilding this office, supporting stakeholders in the EMS community, and promoting good work that our team continues to do is a significant goal that we are accomplishing. We have also placed significant emphasis on updating and implementing financial and grant management software. VDH has and continues to use a homegrown software solution, one that is outdated and inefficient in its operations. We are nearing the rollout of a 21st century financial management solution, complete with grant management tools that a complex agency such as ours requires, and we are very grateful for the ARPA dollars and the timeline we have been given to accomplish this. Governor Youngkin and this administration have continued to be involved in moving VDH forward. Resources have been brought on board from the governor's transformation team and support from the Secretary of Finance and the Secretary of Administration. Their secretariats have been vital, helping us over the last year. We continue to appreciate true partnerships that we have experienced from other state agencies, including the Department of Planning and Budget, Auditor of Public Accounts, Department of Procurement and General Services, Department of Human Resources, and others that have partnered with us to move these and other solutions forward. In closing, we are dedicated to the mission of the Virginia Department of Health to protect the health and promote the well-being of all Virginians. In order to achieve our mission, we must have strong administrative infrastructure that is transparent and accountable. VDH leadership is dedicated to the accountability of our agency. We are rebuilding the Virginia Department of Health so we can help all of Virginians have the opportunity to achieve their best health. Thank you.
Are you finished?
Yes, sir.
I didn't want to interrupt. Thank you. Do members have questions for the commissioner? Okay. Senator McPike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your response and presentation, understanding you being there for roughly a year and a half or so. The Secretary Cummings' letter to the JLARC indicates that each agency in the Commonwealth provides and participates in a quarterly management review process. And when did those begin? And if there's been your experience for the last year and a half at doing quarterly management reviews?
Yes, all the agencies under HHR participate in the quarterly management reviews, and since I came from the time I started, those have been ongoing.
Thank you.
Yes.
Ms. Commissioner, have you asked the General Assembly for anything that we haven't given you? Every year, you know, the administration gets to ask us for what they need. And, you know, you mentioned earlier that we did fund something that you asked for.
Yes. We work with the administration, and last year we did receive funding for our grants management office, as well as for additional funding for our Office of Financial Management for Stabilization that we've received.
Yeah, I have a memory of during the height of COVID that we were concerned about, or the health department had asked for money for their antiquated IT systems, and I think we sent a ton over for that. Is that still operable? Did you spend that money?
We're working with that right now. So through the ARPA money funds that we did receive are over a projected timeline, which will end in December of 2026. So we are on track to have those softwares in place. We had to go through the whole process of procurement and whatnot to get those going through.
Okay, so that's going well.
Yes.
Those federal funds are being spent well. Okay. Do you have a, just one second. Do you have we talked earlier about a number of contractors, which is a concerning problem, or maybe not a problem, but do you have a strategic plan on how many you should have and where you want to use contractors and where you want to use state employees?
Yes, sir. So that is a problem that we have recognized as an over-reliance on contractors. A lot of that came about through COVID because we had a great excess of funding that came with COVID. We had to hire up people to do contact tracing, testing, vaccinations, and then the community outreach ongoing. And there was a question about why they're not gone yet. So the contractors hired for that. The funding of those have lasted for several years so that we can stabilize some of these processes, and we still do have some funding for that. So it is hard to hire in FTEs when you have limited time grant funding. So that has been partially a reason for the over-reliance on contractors, specifically in the last few years. Many of those have been helping with data modernization, our community health workers, and other things that we have done over that time frame.
So do you have a normative, like what you'd really like to have, what the balance would be if you had if you had your druthers, you know, how many contractors you have, because you need flexibility and where they work the best and how many state employees that we need to hire?
I do not have a specific number on that, but in realization of our over-reliance on contractors, we have been actively working throughout the summer and the fall to decrease the number of contractors rather than to fill those with FTEs where able, full-time classified positions, so that we can concentrate on those training aspects of having the appropriate people in the appropriate roles. One of the recommendations has been to have a specific plan on that, and so we will be getting into more specifics on that. But we had already recognized the need to make changes in that area.
Speaking for myself and not the commission, I mean, I just want the job to get done, whether it's our own state employees or contractors. So it's up to you to find the right mix, or we want your advice, especially up on the 12th floor, on what you need. And so we'll be looking forward to the budget on December 18th. Delegate Rasool.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It looks like there was a bit of a mess, and then they brought someone from Southwest Virginia to clean it up. As usual, Mr. Chairman.
Is Roanoke Southwest?
We're adopted, Mr. Chairman. We're adopted, especially when the votes are needed for Mr. Kilgore and others. My question is trying to understand how much of the issues that you've been seeing as you've been coming in over the past year and a half are, there's a hub and spoke model here with 114 health departments. And what wasn't clearly delineated is how many of the issues are at central office and how many are at the health department level. You got a finger on the pulse on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this question. The main part of the issues have been at the central office rather than at the health department level. Part of the reason for this was because of and it's alluded to in the report, there was a financial transformation that occurred just prior to COVID. They had a new deputy commissioner for administration that came on board, and there was a financial plan for consolidation of the financial services, and it was not in its full implementation when COVID started, and so those roles and responsibilities were not solidified, and so this mainly affected the central offices where they pulled all the people together, and so throughout COVID and all the things that occurred, because that was not fully solidified, some of the roles and responsibilities like I said, it ultimately failed. And so with that dissolution prior to my coming, there was recognition of a need for change. And so that has been ongoing over the last year in our financial transformation, the works and steps we've been doing. So these effects do always have effects on the health departments as far as some of their functions, but the financial functions within the health departments have been more intact as far as their people and resources. But we know that it is the backbone of the central office and the administrative supports it does support throughout the whole Virginia Department of Health. And we know that has created struggles in those areas as well.
Thank you. Last question, Mr. Chairman.
He had alluded to,
Drew had alluded to a unsuccessful maybe reorganization. I don't know at what time that actually happened, but maybe you can tell us where that ended, when that was, when that ended, and kind of where we're at in that.
So the transformation began in February of 2020, which was right as the pandemic was unfolding. And so, and it continued until roughly I'm trying to think, it dissipated over time, and I believe was completely dissolved by April of 2023. I then took office in May of 2023.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Well, thank you so much. You got a lot to do in the next 13 months here.
Yes, sir.
We're looking forward to progress. Thank you so much. Okay, moving on to Associate or Deputy Director Brown. Is that?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Good to see you.
My name is Justin Brown. I'm one of the Associate Directors of JLARC. Been here quite a while. The purpose of this agenda item, we can keep this fairly brief to the extent you'd like to do that. The JLARC Study Subcommittee has met twice, and Delegate Simon, who is the chair of that, I saw he is here with us virtually. He has asked us to just kind of put these topics before you. I think we have a slide with the topics on there. I was going to just give a brief overview of each resolution, but they are in your packets. So in the interest of time, you want me to give a quick blurb on each? I'm happy to do that.
I would encourage the members to check it out if you have any questions about them in the next few minutes.
There's 5 of these study resolutions, and the topics are here on the slide. And just as a point of reference, these will be in addition to a joint resolution that was passed by the 2024 General Assembly on the effects of gun violence. So it would be these plus that we would start now and finish up next year. So the recommendation of the study subcommittee is for the full commission to direct us to do this work. But happy to take questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions about these studies?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we adopt the study agenda for next year. Can this be a voice vote?
I think that's fine, yes. Yeah.
Okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Oh, boy.
Weighing in from Falls Church City. Okay. Okay, very good.
Great. So I think that gives us the direction we need. And I'll just go ahead and introduce Ellen Miller for the next agenda item, Mr. Chairman.
Terrific. Thank you.
Annual state spending review.
Welcome, Ms. Miller. Tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Ellen Miller.
Just a little
I've
bit.
been here at JLARC for about 20 years.
Terrific.
Is that enough?
Right.
And I'll present our overview of state spending report.
Which is in your packet.
Yes, it's also in your packet. And here we go. Okay, so this slide just provides the study mandate. And this year's report covers the 10-year period starting in fiscal year 15 and ending in fiscal year 24. In fiscal year 24, Virginia's total operating budget was about $83 billion. In terms of how this amount relates to recent past budgets, you may recall the total budget has had unusual growth patterns recently. The budget dramatically increased in fiscal year 22 because of appropriations of federal COVID-19 relief funding. Then it decreased in fiscal year 23 because COVID-19 funding was much less. And then in fiscal year 24, the total budget increased again, and it's about the same as the fiscal year 22 budget. The general fund budget also grew this year, but compared to the last 2 years when the general fund budget had historically high levels of budget growth, the general fund growth this year was lower than the historic average. Slide 5 shows the trend in how the state budget has grown over the past 10 years. If you look at the bottom line, you'll see the general fund budget grew at a fairly low and steady rate through fiscal year 21. Then there's an uptick through fiscal year 23 before reverting back to its low level of growth. Still, the annual growth rate averaged about 6% per year over the 10-year period, which is actually the same as it was in last year's report. You look at the middle line, you'll see that non-general fund appropriations increased at a faster rate during the total time period, which was 10 years. And the growth was particularly after fiscal year 18, when Medicaid expansion was adopted. Most of the information that we present in this report, as well as my presentation today, is not adjusted for either inflation or population growth, but this particular slide accounts for those factors. And if you focus on the middle set of bars, it's general fund budget growth. And when you control for inflation, you see that the growth reduces from 6% to 2.8%. And then when you also control for population, it reduces a little further to 2.3%. Slide 7 shows the budget over time on a per-person basis and adjusted for inflation. I'll draw your attention to the middle line where you see that if COVID-19 funds are excluded from the non-general fund budget, it remains relatively flat after fiscal year 21. The total budget remains relatively flat between fiscal year 20 and 22, and that's the top line. But then it increases because of the increases in the general fund budget during that time frame before flattening out again. The next few slides focus on growth in total appropriations over the past 10 years. The total operating budget grew by about $4 billion per year on average, and the majority of the growth occurs in a few agencies and programs. Slide 9 shows the top 10 agencies in terms of total appropriation growth, and as in the past, DMAS tops the list with a total budget that grew by an average of about $1.6 billion per year. DOE Direct Aid for K through 12 education and VDOT have also consistently been at the top of the list. And DCR is on the list again this year, and this is primarily because of mandated general fund deposits to the Water Quality Improvement Fund. Slide 10 shows the 10 programs with the highest growth in total appropriations. And not surprisingly, Medicaid tops the list, followed by state education assistance for K through 12. So this programs very closely follow the top 10 agencies. Land and Resource Management is on the list again this year because of the deposit to the Water Quality Improvement Fund. The next few slides focus on growth in the general fund appropriations over the past 10 years. So the general fund budget grew by about $1.4 billion per year on average, and like with total appropriations, growth is mostly concentrated in a few agencies and programs. And this slide lists the top 10 agencies, and you see again that Direct Aid for K through 12 is at the top of the list, followed by DMAS. The Department of Environmental Quality is actually new to the list this year, and that's because it received a portion of the Water Quality Improvement Fund deposits. And DCR, which received the other portion, is also on this list. A new agency on the list this year is VDOT, which typically doesn't receive a lot of general funds, but it rises to the top 10 this year because of general fund appropriations, specifically for improvements to I-64 east of Richmond. Slide 13 lists the top 10 programs in terms of general fund growth, and state education assistance and Medicaid are on the top of this list. You also see, again, land and resource management and environmental financial assistance. And those are the programs that, that receive the water quality improvement funding.
This is for like agricultural best management practices?
Yes.
that the Farm Bureau wants?
Yes, for DCR, that's a big part of it. For DEQ, it's like water treatment systems, things like that.
Right, wastewater treatment.
The next few slides cover non-general fund growth appropriations, which were responsible for 66% of total budget growth during the 10-year period. The Federal Trust Fund has historically been the category with the largest growth amount, primarily because it includes federal funds for Medicaid, as well as the ARPA funds for COVID-19 relief. The other top sources of non-general fund growth include the Commonwealth Transportation Fund and dedicated special revenue.
Can I ask you a question about that? So we hear, with the fuel-efficient cars and electric car growth, people are worried about our transportation funds, these non-general funds we've been raising forever, and how we pay for transportation. How do you explain the growth here with with that fact and us worried about the long-term health of our highway program?
I'd have to look to see, like, over time, has growth continued to be at the same pace for that particular fund, but it usually is typically at the top of the list. And there were recent changes to highway funding. So additional funding is being put into that fund.
These are all non-general funds, though.
And these are all non-general funds. And Commonwealth Transportation also includes federal highway funding as well.
Okay.
So you have to consider that. But in terms of whether the growth has continued at the same rate as historically, I'd have to look back at that. And this slide just points out that there are a wide variety of funds that are considered non-general funds, including funds that you wouldn't typically think of, like college tuition payments. Some people might be surprised that that is actually appropriated and considered non-general. And this slide shows the 10 agencies with the highest growth amounts in terms of non-general funds. And again, DMAS is on the top of the list, followed by VDOT. And there's a couple of universities that also make the list. You'll see UVA and Virginia Tech. And again, that's because of the college tuition payments in part.
Doesn't it include their research money? Because both of them have growing research programs from the federal government, from NIH and...
Yes, so any federal funding that they get from that would be included in this as well, yes. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes most of my slides. I'll just reiterate our key findings, and that's that Virginia's total budget grew by about 7% per year on average over the 10-year period. When you adjust for inflation and population, total budget growth reduced to only 3%. General fund budget growth was 6% per year on average, and then when it's adjusted for, again, inflation and population, growth is only about 2.3%. While year-over-year general fund budget growth was historically high in fiscal year 22 and 23 because of appropriation of surplus funds, its growth this year was actually below the historical average. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I can address any questions.
Anybody have questions for Ms. Miller? Delegate Herring.
Thank you. And so going back to the universities, it's UVA and Virginia Tech. I understand that some of the growth is attributable, like you said, to tuition. And so when we talk about the highest growth, it was slide 9. Is it solely attributable to like tuition or grants, or could there be something else?
I'd have to look specifically at the different appropriation codes that went up and to be able to answer that. So I could get back.
It's possible that just the General Assembly is giving them a little bit more? Or am I way off compared? So that they can make this top 10 list.
They usually make the top 10.
Okay.
And a lot of that is driven by enrollment growth at those universities. There might be some other factors, but I'd have to go back and look for that specific.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions here? Just want to remind the audience that with the growth of Medicaid in the non-general fund area, Medicaid expansion was funded 90% by the federal government, and the other 10% is funded by our Virginia hospitals that are assessing charge themselves. So we're not spending any. We've got zero general dollar funds in the growth of Medicaid. Well, that's an overstatement. Almost all of it is non-general fund growth.
Right. It's still some growth occurs when enrollment increases, but for the non-expansion population.
So this year, out of the $32 billion, I think there was $6 billion was general fund, if my memory serves. The whole program. Okay. Well, thank you so much. And now, Justin, you're going to talk about the management agreement at George Mason University. Explain why you have to do this too.
Thank you for inviting me back, Mr. Chairman. This is something that we're required to do in statute, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but in your packet you have a memo from us about this, and we'll just pull some slides up, and feel free to stop me if you have questions. I'll go ahead and get started. Well, here we go. So, as you may or may not know, we're required periodically to look into how well institutions comply with their management agreements. And the way this works is 3 years after an institution enters into an agreement with the state, statute requires us to review whether the institution is complying with the agreement. And as you can see on the slide, George Mason entered into an agreement and was granted level 3 status back in 2021. And we do the JLARC compliance review at the end of the first 3 years after that agreement being effective. So I imagine most of you are aware of this, but the Higher Education Restructuring Act allows the school to enter into a management agreement to obtain autonomy in those 6 areas that are there on the slide. And the theory is, in exchange for having this autonomy, the school agrees to meet certain aspects related to things like enrollment and operational standards. And so that's what the agreement kind of lays out. One important caveat on this slide is that for George Mason, they're still, I think, kind of incrementally moving out in some of these areas. So for example, particularly in human resources, they are not really using much of that authority, though they have it. So unlike UVA, for example, Mason has not started creating its own workforce of George Mason employees rather than state employees. So just an important caveat there. So as I said, we gave you about 20 pages of detail on this, but the bottom line is that George Mason is complying with the agreement. And you can see here on the slide kind of the 3 factors that we use to reach that conclusion. Some of it's our work, some of it's Chev's work, but overall they're doing what they're supposed to do. This next slide, I'd be happy to talk about this, but there's a lot of different business standard measures that are in various parts of the Appropriation Act or the agreement itself. And this is just a graphical representation of how Mason is doing. And many of the boxes here are dark blue, which means that Mason is meeting or even exceeding those. And there's an appendix to the memo with detail on each. I did want to just elaborate on a few where George Mason did not fully meet a standard. And there was 2 related to financial management. There's a rate of return performance standard, and GMU's returns were below benchmark. Part of the issue here, why that's not maybe terribly concerning, is they, unlike some of the earlier institutions that achieve level 3, don't keep their cash on hand. They keep that with the Treasury. So this is for a fairly small amount of money relative to the total cash that they have. They've recently created a new investment fund to try to get some higher returns on the cash that they are able to keep. Now, this would be money market returns, not trying to knock it out of the park, but that is something that they're kind of moving out on. And the other thing is really just related to the pandemic. The accounts receivables were below the benchmark, but that was a purposeful thing they tried to do to, frankly, be more lenient during the pandemic. So that seemed reasonable to us to do that. The other two standards that George Mason missed are related to IT and HR. Now, the IT one is one that APA cited George Mason for some things related to IT security, risk management, and contingency planning deficiencies. So that is pretty important. But GMU is in the process of addressing those APA findings on IT security. Finally, during this period, GMU was below the benchmark for some staffing-related things. But again, there was a hiring freeze during this time period during the pandemic, so some of that just wasn't, frankly, quite as applicable. The other part of what we're required to do is see how George Mason does on some of these academic standards, and this is a process that Chev has, and so this just shows you George Mason relative to the other institutions. They are actually one of only 5 that received the highest rating of passed. So they're fine there as well. And I will just close on a bit of a parochial note. We said this a couple years ago when we did our review of James Madison. There's some things in the statute that require us to do this work that are just a little out of date. So if anyone would like to carry a bill that probably doesn't require going before Finance or Appropriations, please talk to us. We'd be happy to work with you. But that's all I had, Mr. Chairman. I also note that the Executive Vice President from George Mason is with us virtually in case you have questions for her. And they were great throughout this entire review, so we appreciated their cooperation.
Terrific. So how many level 3 schools do we have?
So there are 6 now, and it's been interesting. The first 3 big ones got it right away in 05 and 06, and that was William & Mary, UVA, and Virginia Tech. And there was a little bit of a lag, and then VCU got it, and then nothing really happened for 8 or 9 years. And then James Madison got it, and now Mason is the last. But unlike the first 3 that got autonomy for everything all at once, and the state was very worried about how that was going to go, it's been different now because it's been incremental with a lot of schools going to kind of tier 2 and then tier 2.5, and so it's been a different circumstance.
Can you remind Virginians what the advantage of being a level 3 institution is?
So the advantage from an institution's perspective is that they don't have to use as many, or frankly, all of the state central processes. So for things like procurement, a lot of capital construction, financial management, the theory is they're big enough to be able to do that on their own. And in return for not having to kind of use those central processes, they have to meet these academic measures. And the theory is that they can operate faster, better, cheaper by not having to go through the state.
Okay, good. Is that proven to be true?
I think in many cases it has. I mean, the institutions could talk about it better. But the one caveat I'll note, the last 2 times we've done this, because it's been so incremental, it's hard to point to like any really big efficiencies going from 2.5 to 3, if that makes sense. But if done right, it absolutely does work.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Brown? Very good. Thank you for that report.
So I will, in the interest of time, introduce the next agenda item, Mr. Chairman, and that is some of our VETA oversight work, and I'll bring up my colleague, Kimberly Sarté, to talk about that.
Thank you, Justin. Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, Ms. Sarté.
My name is Kimberly Sarté, and I'm going to give you a very brief update on VETA before the CIO gets up to give you his annual update, as soon as the slides come up. There we go. So the Appropriation Act requires JLARC to provide oversight of VETA on a continuing basis. This oversight is important because the IT services provided by VETA are critical to agencies' ability to carry out their missions and serve the Commonwealth and its citizens. To give you a little bit of background, VETA has 2 overarching responsibilities. One is providing executive branch agencies with IT infrastructure services, including PCs and laptops, internet, and security. And the other responsibility is overseeing a number of agency IT operations, including things like agency security, management of IT projects, and their IT procurement practices. Some of you may remember that VETA transitioned to a multi-supplier model in 2018 after its contract with Northrop Grumman came to an end. It now contracts with different vendors for each of the 7 infrastructure services it provides, and it has an integrator to help manage all of these different suppliers. And this slide shows you the average annual cost amounts by vendor. The largest infrastructure contract is with Verizon for voice and data network services, which is in large part internet services. And some of the other large contracts are for storage and end user devices like laptops. So to prepare for this status update, we conducted interviews with 7 of VITA's largest customer agencies. These agencies reported that VITA's multi-supplier service model has generally improved. The quality of the infrastructure services has largely improved, and agencies reported an increased focus by VITA on meeting customer needs. And Mr. Chairman, this is worth noting because this has not always been the case. Early on in the transition to the multi-supplier model, agencies were generally not satisfied with the services that they received. And they reported that VITA did not have a customer focus. So these improvements are important and definitely worth noting. However, there were some common concerns that were voiced across the agencies that we interviewed. The quality and reliability of the network is still a concern for some agencies. VITA has focused on improving the network in recent years, but agencies still report some network outages and slow connectivity. And part of this is because the network and where the problems can occur is very complex. However, agencies rely heavily on network services for nearly all aspects of their operations. So continued improvement in the network performance is very important. And we will certainly continue to monitor the network through our oversight. Several agencies also expressed concern about VITA's security services. Some had concerns about the consistency of VITA's vulnerability scanning, and as a result are purchasing their own scanning services. There were also concerns about the timely patching of security vulnerabilities. VITA indicated improvements in this area and also reports that it prioritizes its responses based on the probability and potential impact of a vulnerability. However, again, security is very important, so we will also continue to monitor VITA's progress in this area. And Mr. Chairman, that includes my very brief update, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Ms. Terrific. Do you have any questions for Ms. Sorte?
Okay.
That's great.
If not, next I would like to introduce Mr. Robert Osmond, who is Virginia's Chief Information Officer and is also the agency head for VITA.
Good morning, Mr. Osmond. Congratulations on that stellar report there. Would you like a job at the health department?
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it. What a pleasure it is to speak with you today and talk about some of the work we've been doing at VITA to help us improve services, improve our core mission area. My name is CIO Bob, and this January will be my 10th year with the Commonwealth. I'm very excited about that. Prior to coming to the role in 2022, I was the Chief of Technology and Business Strategy at the Virginia Department of Transportation. And then before joining state government, I spent 20 years in the private sector, most of it with IBM doing large-scale IT projects. Presentation, please. So as we think about some of the work that we do, we already talked about the 4 main areas: cybersecurity, infrastructure, governance, procurement. We've been focusing on our people, basically rebuilding our workforce. Like many agencies, we were hampered by the pandemic. We lost a lot of headcount. So when I joined back in 2022, we were around 200. We've been working hard to bring that number up. We're currently at around 290, which is still a bit below our MEL level. So we've got a little bit more work to do, but we have steadily been improving. One of the things that's notable about our staff is that about 10 to 15% of our workforce is now junior talent. This is something that it was not normally placed in the agency, and we've been working hard to build that pipeline of talent, bringing new people in and helping to manage this process. And a key benefit has been in some of the, that's a 38% increase in terms of our staffing levels. The nature of IT in the Commonwealth is decentralized, and so we work together as a team with the agencies that we support. It's very much a partnership. So though I might provide infrastructure services, those are supporting agency applications, and agencies are responsible for their work. They're responsible for their data, and then we provide cybersecurity, data governance, in partnership with the Office of Data Governance and Analytics to provide that support across the board. If you look at the enterprise as a whole, it's about $1.5 billion. It's about a third of that is spent with VITA, 2/3 spent by agencies themselves. And this does not include independent agencies, higher education, those other functions, non-executive branch. So scope is pretty broad, 67 agencies, a lot of locations, a lot of different services, assets that are all managed as part of the enterprise. Our operating model, as we talked about, is a multi-supplier integrator model. So I swear that's not me.
Can you get someone from your agency over here?
So, and one of the things we've been working is to refresh the towers, and that is reset them. When we put the process in place in around 2018, we had an idea of how it would all work. As the years have gone by, we've needed to refine it a little bit. So we've been doing some tower changes. In 2021, we awarded the NTT data contract for messaging to tune that. We've re-awarded the mainframe contract, and then cloud is the new one that we've put in. We awarded that to NTT Data for Azure, and then we're currently working on managed security. So we are trying to refresh these contracts, make sure they stay aligned with what the Commonwealth needs. And then in the future, we're going to work on EUC, and which is workstations and computers, the data center work, and then the MSI and network contracts. Those are coming up. Generally speaking, we've held the line in terms of cost. That is, in many cases, prices have gone up in a lot of areas. Price of bacon has increased. IT, we've tried to buck the trend by driving efficiency within our different areas, and we've been seeing some decreases in some of the costs of a lot of the core goods and services that agencies consume. We do see some growth in some of these areas. Most of that growth is through additional consumption. Agencies are producing more data. They need to store the data. Agencies are using higher order services. And of course, as the next slide will show, network improvements, those have increased consumption. So we've continued the trend of solid performance. Last year, I presented on some of the key areas that we improved. This year, we've continued that trend, focusing hard on network, improving some of those areas as JLARC recommended. We had some work to do, and we've been doing that work. Building out more cloud capabilities, artificial intelligence, some of the shared services, and then the cyber grant program. We've been working in all these different areas. Network, we've made a lot of work. I mean, this was not a pretty slide a year ago. We've been digging into this process. And so we have really dug into a lot of the areas of overutilization. I know 3 years ago when I was in the agency, you could not have a meeting on Zoom. It just wasn't happening. The network would not support it. They told us it just wouldn't work. And so we've been working hard to fix that problem, making sure that most of Virginia sites have broadband. We've been upgrading that heavily, working in partnership with our agencies. Every one of those sites represent a project that we had to initiate. And then we've been digging into the whole overutilization problem. It's kind of flattened out a little bit. A lot of that's due to increased consumption. As you build out more capacity, people use more capacity. I think last week I was on a Zoom meeting with 230 people. It was amazing to watch it, and it went off flawlessly. So that was a beautiful thing. And then we've scaled that network about 1,300% and growing. So a lot of work. We're continuing to work in this space. Cyber, a lot of work in cyber. This is an area that you can see that the cyber threats have doubled from last year to this year. We're a lot of malware that they're sending to us. We've done a lot of work around trying to identify these malware, block it at the source, better orchestration, better automation. One of the things that was mentioned by JLARC, as they've observed, is that we've tightened up the standard around vulnerability management and patching. It went from 90 days to 30 days. So that put a little bit of strain on the system. As agencies that we work together with, they've identified some of these areas, and we're having to work hard together to improve. When we first did that, we found that we weren't really hitting the target. Right now, we're at 50%. We're going to continue working it. We think we can get to 85, 90%, hopefully by the end of the year, with a lot of hard sweat equity and a lot of IT people working hard. We've added 30 more cybersecurity professionals over the last year to grow our team out and increase that capability. And in partnership with Treasury, this is the second year in a row that our cyber insurance has gone down, our cybersecurity insurance. And that's pretty cool. I don't know if too many people can say that about their auto insurance or home insurance. Insurance tends to go up, not down. And some of this work that we're doing is being recognized by the third parties that manage our risk, and it's reflective in the reduced rates that we now pay. Key features around the work that we're doing around the state and local cybersecurity grant program. We're extending the services to look at the whole of state, the localities. We're working with about 91% of those localities. We've finished wrapping up the assessment. This was work that was provided, sponsored by CISA and FEMA, and then Virginia provided matching funds to support that. 80% of this funding is going to localities, making sure that they have what they need to secure their data. Whether a citizen is in a locality, they still have to be supported. Citizen data. And so we definitely are very proud of the work that we're doing to take on that mission of owning it and helping the localities with the work that they're doing. Cloud. This is an area that we're working hard to build out cloud capabilities, making sure that we can go faster, that we can unlock new technologies in the cloud. One of the things is around building servers faster. It used to take about 2 to 3 weeks to build a server. Now we're doing it in a couple hours using automation. We're using more of a consumption model. So instead of billing for products, we're able to bill for services used. Agencies pay for what they use, and they're incentivized to turn the lights off when they're not running it. So
Mr. Osmond,
we think that will help.
Yeah, AWS is a contractor to VITA.
Yes, sir. AWS is one of our vendors.
Okay.
Yes, sir. We're working with them through the Unisys contract for server storage data centers.
Okay. Do we have other data centers that we use that were contracted to particularly help us?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Our private cloud is running through QTS. That is a data center. It's located in Sandston, and then we have a backup data center in Northern Virginia. And then we're also using workloads that are in Oracle, Microsoft, and then we're working on Google as well.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir. One of the things we want to do more of is projects like the Virginia Permit Transparency Project. This is an application innovation. As the slide earlier showed, generally speaking, we tend to focus on infrastructure and agencies do applications. But in situations where you have many agencies that have a similar need, VITA can provide help. And so in this example, this was an application that was incubated within the Department of Environmental Quality. They were seeing really good results. And then the Office of Regulatory Management, they took leadership and said, we need to do this statewide. And so we looked at that. Instead of each of the agencies doing it individually, VITA provided a synergistic role to help create a single solution that could help all of the agencies that are participating. And the governor recently put out Executive Order 39 looking at further encouraging agencies to participate. And in this way, we're able to use a similar type of approach to scale a very good practice. DEQ saw results of 70% cycle time by better managing the workflow and providing better visibility to citizens. At this time, we have 10 agencies participating. We have over 100 different permit types, and we've processed over 100,000 applications. So we think that there are more opportunities for us to use shared services where it makes sense in the Commonwealth. And then we are using artificial intelligence. I know there's a lot of conversation on that. Within the MSI model, we're using it within ourselves to help us better counter cybersecurity problems. And so some of our tools have built-in cybersecurity capabilities. We're using virtual agents to kind of help navigate information. And then some of our enterprise tools have embedded artificial intelligence capabilities within that. So we're definitely trying to lead with examples of how we can better use tools like artificial intelligence to become more efficient and effective as an agency. And then one of the things we wanted to highlight, this was a request from our partners at JLARC, was to talk about the CrowdStrike outage. This was a very difficult time. I remember my phone blowing up at 3 a.m. in the morning as we started seeing our Windows servers going down, and we're like wondering what the heck is happening. Very quickly, we realized that this was a global event that was happening and that Virginia was affected because we use CrowdStrike as for our cybersecurity program, and we also use Windows servers. And so that combination was causing some challenges. So what we were able to do in a couple of days was remediate over 1,000 servers, working very closely with our agencies, because as we remediate, agencies had to test and validate that servers were reoperational, that they were able to restore critical agency functions. At the time, we were trying to prioritize key events like the DMV. They had to understand whether or not they could reopen, by the afternoon. And so we were able to get the technology servers in place so they could resume processing transactions. We were able to open up in partnership with VDOT and DBHDS to open up clinics. So as workstations were affected and needed to be remediated over the weekend, we had to manually touch over 20,000 servers, and we responded to over 4,000 help desk tickets. That was a pretty big deal. We worked great as a team, agencies, VITA, our contractors, throughout that weekend. And by Sunday, we had remediated most of the servers, including non-production, and that by Friday of the following week, we had touched and remediated all the workstations. So we were in a pretty good shape in the Commonwealth as we weathered this particular challenging event. One of the things we did also last year was we put out our Commonwealth of Virginia technology strategy to lay out what is our roadmap, some of the key initiatives we're using to drive improvement over the next several years. These are the principles we plan to follow. This is publicly available as we inform some of the work that we're doing to drive projects. And then as we look ahead, we do, as we've improved a lot of the work around infrastructure, we do want to help our agencies with application modernization. Those are the systems that deliver a lot of these core services. Many of them are quite old. 15% are over 20 years old, 42% over 10, and 2/3 over 5. That's old software. We have about 2,500 systems, so it's a lot of scope, and so we do see the need to help get in front of this challenge, and so because some of these applications could take years to remediate, and we want to make sure we do it correctly. Earlier this year, we went through a needs assessment where we identified about 123 proposed systems that were challenged. They need some work to modernize. That's a big number, $477 million of funding, but that's over many years, so I don't want to scare folks with that number, but we do need to take a hard look at that. Those assets, like other assets, our technology needs to be supported. And so over the next 9 to 12 months, we are going to be looking at planning processes. We're going to look at better ways of managing and supporting our projects, looking at different ways of identifying shared services, and also helping to build out our teams to grow and support this area. And lastly, I want to close by just saying thank you. I mean, we do appreciate the partnership with the General Assembly. Together, we've done a lot of terrific work, and we look forward to continuing our service and support for the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Terrific. Is there anything particular you need for next year?
Sir, we are putting in some requests through the budgetary process, some funding for key resources in the area of cybersecurity, application modernization, some work around project management within, and then also we would like to ask the General Assembly to support some of the agency asks. They're going to be putting in some requests to modernize some key agency applications, and we would appreciate your attention on those matters.
Well, let us know. Any questions for Mr. Osmond? Okay. Mr. Greer, to sum up here.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you for all the good work.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much. Thank you very much for your attention today. Thank you all for being here at the noon hour. That concludes the agenda for today. The last JLARC meeting of the year is going to be Monday, December 9th at 10 a.m. At that meeting, we'll present the findings from our reviews of data centers, of broadband, and then of legislative compensation. So thank you again for your attention.
Okay, thank you. We are adjourned without objection.